Today, Live Nation doesn't just dominate the ticketing. It's about 70% of the big concert market. But also, they own many of the major venues. And for the venues that they don't own, they tend to lock in on 3, 5, 7-year agreements, which means that the competitors that are out there aren't able to even compete when it comes to the ticketing. Finally, they dominate the promoting. So we have talked to many venues, some of which aren't willing to come forward, unlike one of them that is here today, but that say even if they're not out there threatening them, they're afraid to go to someone else because then they're not going to get the acts that they want. This is all a definition of monopoly because Live Nation is so powerful that it doesn't even need to exert pressure. It doesn't need to threaten because people just fall in line.
Which is exactly what Congress was warned would happen back in 2009 before this merger was allowed to go forward.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 267th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. If this is your first time listening to my podcast, first of all, thank you for checking it out. I know trying out a new podcast is something a lot of people are telling you to do, and trying one out about Congress might sound awful. Because most podcasts that have to do with government are actually about politics. They're about who's raising the most money and, what person said this about that person. It's very high school drama and it's very icky. And this podcast is different. This is a podcast that's about governing. I watch hearings and I read bills and laws, and I want to know what these people do once we give them the job, as opposed to what they are saying in order to be reelected. As many of you know, the last Congress passed thousands of pages of legislation into law 5 seconds before Christmas. And so I've been working my way through that these last few weeks. And I do have at least 2 episodes coming up for you that are coming from last year's National Defense Authorization Act alone. That's our war authorization. And I've found some interesting things. But this week, while I was reading and working on those episodes, a hearing took place that I just had to watch for funsies. And this hearing was a good one. It was a really good one. And so I'm going to share the highlights from that hearing with you today. This episode is essentially going to be a mashup of the 3-hour hearing that took place on January 24th in the Senate Judiciary Committee, which has been keeping an eye on the merger between Live Nation and Ticketmaster for well over a decade. And this one I wanted to watch right away because, well, it affects me. It affects me in a few ways, actually, and I have some competing bias with this topic. As longtime Congressional Dish listeners know, I feel like everybody has a bias. Anyone who tells you that they don't is either ignorant of their own bias or lying. And so I like to wear mine right on my sleeve and tell you what they are. And so when it comes to my bias in this episode, on the one hand, I am an artist. I'm a performer who's about to start producing and performing in live podcast recordings for my other podcast, We're Not Wrong. And if you're not familiar with that podcast, I can't blame you. It's quite new, and I don't talk about it very much on this show. But last May, Justin Robert Young, Andrew Heaton, and I started recording weekly conversations about whatever that week's hot topics are. But the reason that we started doing this is that the 3 of us come at issues from really different perspectives. So like Justin Robert Young's main podcast is Politics, Politics, Politics. And so you can guess what his show is about. Then there's mine, Congressional Dish, which is about governing. And then Andrew Heaton, I never know how to describe Andrew, but he used to work for Fox Business, and then he worked for Glenn Beck at The Blaze. And so he does have corporate media experience in the right-wingosphere, but he didn't belong there, and he didn't last there because he is a nuanced, thoughtful, just delightful Oklahoman who thinks differently from how Justin and I do. All 3 of us disagree with each other all the time, but we're friends and we are perfectly aware of our powerlessness in all of these issues that we talk about. And so our conversations and even our disagreements are fun. They are such thought-provoking, laughter-inducing conversations when I'm with these guys. And so we started recording our conversations, and We're Not Wrong was born. And so since we started that last May, I've got to tell you that that podcast has become one of the joys of my career, and it's something that I look forward to doing every week. And the format of the show is one that is perfect for touring with, because we do love meeting up with people like you. In fact, we are recording our first live podcast on March 1st at Piano Fight in San Francisco at 8 p.m. I'm very excited about that, and I'll put a link to buy tickets in this episode's show notes and on Patreon as soon as I have the link. We're still working on, finalizing the details. But Piano Fight booked us in the big theater, and so Bay Area, please show up. Because not only do we want to fill that room and meet you, but we also need your help in crafting these live shows. We want your feedback and your ideas. And so please mark March 1st on your calendars, my Bay Area friends, because I would love to see you there. But back to the point of this episode. Really soon, I'm going to be one of those performers who needs to deal with booking venues and ticketing shows. And so I was watching this hearing through the eyes of a performer to see what I'm in for. But I was also watching it as a season ticket holder for 2 NFL teams. I have tickets for the Raiders and the Chargers. And I know that's weird. I know that they are division rivals. And I really only like one of those teams. So the team that I like is the Raiders. I moved to the Bay Area in 2014 when the Raiders were in the middle of an epic losing streak. It went back like a season and a half. And Joe and I had just moved there, and we made some friends with some football friends, a bunch of girls actually, at a bar. And so there was this one night when it was really warm out, but it was raining cats and dogs. It was a Thursday night, and we looked online and noticed that there were tickets available for the Raiders game for $5. And so even though it was raining like crazy, we were like, $5, like, let's do this. And so we put on plastic bags and we went to the Coliseum. And they were playing the Kansas City Chiefs, which for those of you who don't know or care about football, that is a division rival. And so we watched the first half. It's pouring. And a lot of the people that had gone to this game, keeping in mind that the stadium was only like a quarter of the way through, a lot of the people that went to the game after a half of a game of nonstop rain had left. And so the only people that were left were crazy people like the 5 of us and true diehard fans. And so by the second half, everyone had just moved down to the front of the stadium. We bought tickets for the nosebleeds and we ended up like 3 rows back. And all of a sudden, at halftime, all of the clouds went away. The weather became perfect. It was like 75 degrees. And somehow, this really shitty Raiders team beat the Kansas City Chiefs. And so they broke the streak on a fairly miserable Thursday night game. And the people that were there were so excited. I don't think that there's any atmosphere at any kind of game. Like, I can't imagine any kind of Super Bowl win or anything else I could be present for where the joy was that overwhelming. Perfect strangers giving each other hugs. And it was such a cool experience. And so I fell in love with the Raiders that day. And so we go home, and the next day, Joe and I were just looking at, how much are season tickets for this team? And it turns out that the Raiders were so bad and had such a hard time filling their stadium that it was $250 for the entire season, which was wild. And so we talked to a group of our friends, and by the time the next season rolled around, I believe there were 11 of us that bought season tickets, and we just had this like standing date with all of our friends where if you weren't busy on a Sunday, you just meet at Raider Stadium. And we partied in the parking lot, continued the party into the stadium, watched some really bad football, and we kept our season tickets all those years. Fast forward, the team gets moved to Vegas, and because we had season tickets for that long, we got a really good deal on seat licenses for the new stadium that was built in Las Vegas. And so we bought 2 seat licenses, and we still go to the games, and I enjoy the Raiders games. So that's why we have those. There is some love there. As for the Chargers, there is no love there. I think they're a garbage franchise, and they put on a terrible show, to be completely honest with you. And so I was investing less in the Chargers than I was investing in the brand new stadium. because I wanted seat licenses for SoFi Stadium, which, if you don't know, is a gorgeous new stadium really close to the LAX airport in Los Angeles. And I was raised in Southern California. My parents still live there. I have a huge family. I have siblings, step-siblings, nieces, nephews, cousins, friends. So many people I love in California. And so we wanted seat licenses in part so that we would be able to get any of us face value tickets to events at SoFi, because without this hookup, we're all at the mercy of the ticket flippers. And so when I found out through an old friend at the Chargers who split the building of the stadium and the seat licenses with the Los Angeles Rams, the Chargers is a team that no one wanted in Los Angeles. They still don't want in Los Angeles. Most of those games are filled with fans from the away teams. And so while the Rams did just fine selling all their seat licenses, the Chargers, with a deadline coming up in a matter of days, were really struggling to sell theirs. And so we jumped on a if you know opportunity to buy these really valuable seat licenses for really, really cheap. And so we did. But part of the deal with those seat licenses is that we have to buy tickets to all of the Chargers games. And obviously, we don't go to all the games. I don't live in California anymore. And so we do sell the tickets for both the Raiders and the Chargers that we don't go to on the resale market. And so when I look at this issue of ticketing, I'm really on all sides of it. I'm a performer and a fan and a purchaser and a seller, which is why I selfishly wanted to watch this hearing right away. And I learned a lot about the live event market and thought you might want to get the Cliff's Notes version of this super interesting hearing too. Because Congress is thinking of legislating live event ticketing. And if you have thoughts about what you hear today, what they're proposing to do, the time to speak up really is now. Because I know the common wisdom is that nothing is going to get done in this Congress. But on this issue, I don't think that's necessarily the case. And so real quick, before we get to the hearing, let's get the fine print out of the way. Because as always, all sources I used in researching this episode are in the show notes for you, along with links to the full hearings. Because I did watch some old hearings for background on this episode too. But there aren't going to be timestamps for these clips because I chopped up and rearranged these clips by topic. And it's just really hard to give you timestamps when I do that because I'm moving everything around. Because in these hearings, just the way they're structured, if you've never watched a hearing before, is that a question will be answered, and then sometimes the follow-up question doesn't happen for an hour and a half. And so my goal is to put the conversation together for you. But you don't have to, in fact, you really shouldn't, trust my edits, because I trust no one. And so I take no offense to you checking my work. I give you show notes so that you can check my work. And so if you want to watch this hearing in full and see if my editing was fair, please do so. And if you think I was wrong or unfair about something, please tell me. In a friendly, good faith way, please. I am doing my best here. But if I agree that I did something wrong or if I omitted something important, please tell me. Because I always will admit my mistakes on the air at the beginning of the episode after when that mistake is caught. Which is why I'm so careful to not make mistakes, because I hate having to do that. But you can find those show notes and my contact information and all the options for paying for this listener-supported effort on congressionaldish.com. Okay, so now let's get started with the hearing. This hearing was an investigation into Live Nation, which describes itself as the world's leading live entertainment company. Live Nation produces and promotes approximately 40,000 shows, over 100 festivals, and sells more than 500 million tickets per year. And that last part, the ticketing, is possible because in 2010, Live Nation bought Ticketmaster. And we all know who Ticketmaster is. Here's Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, followed by Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. And they are explaining why the Senate Judiciary Committee conducted this hearing.
Live event ticketing garnered a lot of attention toward the end of 2022, most notably in November when Ticketmaster systems failed during the pre-sale for Taylor Swift's new tour, leaving millions of fans stuck in virtual queues for hours waiting to buy tickets.
But Taylor Swift, I think it's important for our colleagues and all to note, is just one example. Whether it's Bruce Springsteen or BTS or Bad Bunny or in the past Pearl Jam or the Pixies, fans, artists, and venues are facing real issues with Live Nations.
So let's look into what happened to those artists real quick, shall we? So the catalyst for this hearing was the Swiftie debacle. Because in mid-November of last year, 2022, approximately 1.5 million people with codes, which would let them buy pre-sale tickets for Taylor Swift's tour, registered on Ticketmaster's verified fan system pretty much all at once. After they registered, instead of being able to quickly and conveniently buy tickets, Swifties who had been led to believe that they would essentially be guaranteed access to tickets, they waited and waited and waited, watching the spinning wheel of frustration for hours. And many Taylor Swift fans were left with nothing at the end of that day, filled with TikTok rage. Professional scalpers, however, were able to scoop up thousands of tickets, even though Ticketmaster assured Taylor Swift that their relatively new verified fan system would make that impossible. And that led to even more fan frustration, because now the fans would have to buy tickets at wildly inflated prices on the resale market if they wanted to exercise all their rage at their exes, along with all of the other Swifties at her concert. Now, here's what Live Nation Ticketmaster's representative at the hearing had to say about that situation.
I'm Joe Berchtold, President and Chief Financial Officer of Live Nation Entertainment. The recent on-sale experience with Taylor Swift, one of the world's most popular artists, has highlighted the need to address these issues urgently. We knew bots would attack that on sale and planned accordingly. We were then hit with 3 times the amount of bot traffic that we'd ever experienced. And for the first time in 400 verified fan on sales, they came after our verified fan password servers as well. While the bots failed to penetrate our systems or acquire any tickets, the attack requires to slow down and even pause our sales. This is what led to a terrible consumer experience, which we deeply regret. We apologize to the fans. We apologize to Ms. Swift. We need to do better, and we will do better.
Live Nation Ticketmaster blames the bots. But Taylor Swift wasn't the only artist named in this hearing who has had very public feuds with Ticketmaster, and some of the other situations cannot be blamed on bots. And the problems have been going on for a long time. So in 2009, here's what happened to Bruce Springsteen fans. Here's Senator Chuck Schumer of New York in a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing that took place on February 24th, 2009.
Many fans were told the shows were sold out, when in fact they were not. The fans were then provided links to Ticketmaster's own ticket reselling site, ticketsnow.com, where they were charged many times the face value of the tickets. Talk about a way to have your cake and eat it too. Bruce Springsteen says Ticketmaster abused his fans, and I agree with the boss.
More recently, at the end of just last year, the boss again expressed frustration with Ticketmaster after Ticketmaster's dynamic pricing system caused tickets for his upcoming tour to increase up to $5,000 per ticket as people on the Ticketmaster site were buying tickets. Dynamic pricing, under the banner of supply and demand, increases ticket prices as tickets get sold and inventory goes down, which is frustrating to artists who set prices for their shows and then watch as their fans get price gouged in tandem with a sales success. Another band that has had recent trouble with Ticketmaster is the K-pop band BTS. In a debacle that Joe and I actually got caught up in October of 2021, BTS announced that they would hold their first post-pandemic concert at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, the stadium that I hold seat licenses at. My niece, who lives in Southern California, is absolutely obsessed with K-pop. This scenario is precisely why we wanted the seat licenses. We wanted those seat licenses so that we would have access to pre-sales and so that we could get seats for face value for the people that we love. And we tried to get tickets for her. But despite our seat licenses, we never got the chance to buy tickets, even though we were guaranteed access to pre-sale tickets. The tickets sold out before we even had a chance to purchase anything. And forget about the rest of the K-pop fans. But tens of thousands of tickets became immediately available in the resale market for thousands of dollars each. Needless to say, my niece didn't get to go to the concert, and many other BTS fans were left out in the cold as well. And while we didn't try to buy tickets last year when BTS played at Allegiant Stadium, which is where the Raiders play and where we have seat licenses in Las Vegas, I do know that the same thing happened. People with pre-sale codes were left out of the sale, but thousands of tickets were somehow scooped up by professional scalpers and were immediately posted on the resale market for, again, thousands of dollars per ticket. And that can't be seat license holders like us buying tickets and flipping them. we would have been limited to buying, I think, 6 tickets, and it takes us a minute to post them. For that many thousands of tickets to be immediately available in the resales like that, bots and professional scalpers had to be gaming the Ticketmaster system somehow to get that many tickets and then to post them in bulk right away. And how they play at least half of that game is no longer a mystery to me. Because in 2018, the Pixies, among other bands, went public with their fury at Ticketmaster after undercover reporters working for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation approached Ticketmaster representatives at a trade show in Las Vegas, where they were told by Ticketmaster employees that Ticketmaster turns a blind eye to scalpers who use hundreds of fake identities and accounts to exceed Ticketmaster's ticket buying limits. Now, the reason that the Ticketmaster employees made that admission to the journalists was because at that trade show, at a co-branded booth, Ticketmaster was promoting Trade Desk to professional scalpers. Or more accurately, they were promoting it to journalists pretending to be professional scalpers. But Trade Desk is a software tool designed to help professional scalpers manage their huge inventories of tickets on resale sites including Ticketmaster's. Let me say that again. Ticketmaster has an app that they designed to help professional scalpers sell their tickets in bulk. And the reason why they would do that is clear. Ticketmaster is financially incentivized to help scalpers, even if they brand bots and scalpers as the devil in congressional hearings, because if a ticket is resold via Ticketmaster, Ticketmaster collects fees a second time on the same ticket. Every time a ticket flips, Ticketmaster gets paid. So why wouldn't they help the flippers? And to be clear, Ticketmaster, in response to the investigation going public, denied that they have any programs in place to help the scalpers buy huge quantities of tickets. But they were never accused of doing that. What Ticketmaster was, and probably still is, doing with Trade Desk is helping the scalpers who get huge quantities of tickets resell them, and then taking a cut of those sales. Now, it's tough to know for sure if Ticketmaster is still partnered with Trade Desk because Ticketmaster doesn't mention Trade Desk on their website, and the Trade Desk website is password protected. However, the Trade Desk app is currently listed in Google Play and in the Apple App Store as Trade Desk by Ticketmaster. So there is cause to believe that this expose changed nothing at Ticketmaster. And if this is the case, as I suspect, Ticketmaster clearly isn't cracking down too hard on professional scalpers if they're helping those scalpers on the selling end and then taking a cut of the scalpers' profits. They're in business together. But back to our list of artists who are pissed at Ticketmaster, there's also Bad Bunny. Much like what happened to the Swifties, in April 2021, Ticketmaster's system crashed because it couldn't handle the crush of people trying to buy Bad Bunny tickets. Fans waited for hours to buy tickets, and when it was their turn, Ticketmaster would boot them out of the system. These fans then watched tickets appear for hundreds and thousands of dollars per ticket on the resale market in real time, as they were unable to buy face value tickets on Ticketmaster. But even the lucky Bad Bunny fans who did get legit tickets from Ticketmaster, some of them in Mexico City turned out not to be all that lucky at all. Because just last month, Bad Bunny performed at a sold-out show in Azteca Stadium, but the stadium floor was half empty. The reason was that all of the missing people had tickets purchased directly from Ticketmaster, and those tickets were malfunctioning at the door, with the scanners declaring them invalid. Thousands of people who had paid for legit concert tickets, some who had paid almost $1,000 per ticket, were left listening in the parking lot because Ticketmaster's customer service wasn't replying to emails or answering their phones. On top of that, hundreds of other people were sold fake tickets. But the point is that the scanners at the door couldn't tell the difference. The scene outside, as you may expect, turned ugly. There were lots of tears and lots of anger expressed towards the authorities who were keeping the fans outside. Cops ended up beating people. It seemed like a pretty scary and dangerous scene. So the point is that Ticketmaster has been pissing off artists and fans for literally decades. And people have tried to fight back. One of the first and most dedicated ragers against the Ticketmaster machine was Pearl Jam. Here's what happened when they tried to fight Ticketmaster in a battle over fees back in 1994. This is old footage from Entertainment Tonight.
In May, Seattle's super grunge band Pearl Jam went public with its battle against Ticketmaster. At issue, the service charges that Ticketmaster tacks on to every seat that they sell. charges that the band claimed were so exorbitant they were forced to cancel their summer tour rather than gouge their fans. So, instead of spending their summer on the road, Pearl Jam members Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard are instead on Capitol Hill, testifying before a House of Representatives subcommittee on Ticketmaster's pricing practices and alleged monopoly in the marketplace.
It is well known in our industry that some portion of the service charges Ticketmaster collects on its sale of tickets is distributed back to the promoters in the venues. It is this incestuous relationship and the lack of any national competition for Ticketmaster that has created the situation we're dealing with today. As a result, our band, which is concerned about keeping the price of its tickets low, will almost always be in conflict with Ticketmaster, which has every incentive to try to find ways to increase the price of the ticket it sells.
Do you think Ticketmaster is entitled to a profit?
I think our main concern is, are we entitled to use a different company other than Ticketmaster?
And Stone Gossard's question remains relevant almost 30 years later. Because in 1995, the Justice Department closed their investigation into Ticketmaster without having done a damn thing about the problem, saying they would monitor the situation. And their monitoring became critical a decade and a half later when Live Nation announced their intention to buy Ticketmaster, which was investigated as a possibly illegal merger by the Department of Justice. The reason for that investigation is that Section 7 of the Clayton Act says that no corporation may acquire another corporation if, quote, the effect of such acquisition may be substantially to lessen competition or to tend to create a monopoly, unquote. And so the Department of Justice and Congress considered whether a merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster would substantially lessen competition. Here's testimony from 2009 in a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing examining the merger before it happened. This clip is Seth Hurwitz, who is the co-owner of IMP Productions, a concert promoter and competitor to Live Nation. But before I play you his testimony, here's a witness from this week explaining what a concert promoter is.
My name is Jerry Michelson, CEO and president of Jam Productions, a company that has produced and promoted events since 1972. As a primer for those who may not know, let me briefly talk about the job of promoters. We work with agents and managers to route tours into markets across the country. We make guaranteed payment to artists, contract with the venue to hold the event, market the show, put tickets on sale, and produce the show. We pay all the costs and assume all the risks.
14 years ago, Seth Hurwitz, a guy with that job, an independent concert promoter, testified to Congress about his concerns for his business if his competition, Live Nation, were allowed to purchase Ticketmaster. And in this clip, you're going to hear a term that you will hear repeated throughout the hearing: vertical integration. Because when it comes to monopolies, a lot of us understand the concept of horizontal integration or a horizontal merger, even if we aren't familiar with that term. A horizontal merger is when a company gobbles up similar companies until there are almost no competitors left. So Facebook is a good example of a company that's done that. Facebook and Instagram were similar products. Both were facilitating social interactions. Both facilitated the sharing of photos and videos. They were competitors with similar products. And so Facebook, being the larger company, was threatened by Instagram, and so they bought it. And just like that, there was no more competition from Instagram. And so antitrust cases that involve horizontal integration are relatively easy to spot and are the easiest to combat in court when the Justice Department bothers to enforce antitrust laws. But vertical integration is what Live Nation and Ticketmaster are accused of doing. Vertical integration is when companies that are in the same industry but perform different functions in that industry merge, allowing the parent company to control more of the industry by owning multiple parts of the supply chain. So here's what that looked like in terms of the merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster. Here's then Live Nation competitor Seth Hurwitz of IMP Productions offering some history and a warning to Congress in 2009.
I'm going to start with a short history of how we got here. The market used to be healthy. Concert promoters had their own geographical areas and competed in the individual markets. The promoters that did the best jobs with the best venues and the lowest ticket prices got the shows. The customers then got concerts in the best places with the lowest ticket prices. But then a roll-up artist named Robert Sillerman showed up with a plan. He consolidated as many promoters and their venues as he could buy under one roof and touted his plan as what was best for the consumer and the industry. He paid whatever it took to sign up the acts for the tours, all to give the appearance of an undeniable juggernaut. He sold the conglomeration to a company called Clear Channel under the veil of gaining control of the industry through vertical integration. in this case, radio. They owned over 1,000 radio stations. It didn't take too long for folks to figure out how rotten this new Clear Channel situation was. In fact, one of Mr. Azoff's own clients, Don Henley of the Eagles, even testified against it. There were accusations of being denied airplay for not playing radio-sponsored concerts. Those were piling up, and a lawsuit from an independent promoter in Denver that couldn't buy airtime or get promotion for his independent concerts. With antitrust allegations mounting, Clear Channel spun off the company and called it Live Nation. So, same principles, same business model, but it wasn't dragging Clear Channel down anymore. By now, overpricing on every level had become the order of the day. Even bigger offers were put in front of bands with the accompanying ticket prices that justified them. And the more money it took to lock these tours up, the higher those tickets went. Yes, of course, the bands could have said no, just like my kids could say no if I put ice cream in front of them for dinner. But the idea of blaming the artist for ticket prices is completely out of context. The offers come from the promoters who are supposed to know their market. And in Live Nation's case, they are the self-proclaimed leader of the concert world who claim then and now to know what's best for everyone. At this point, there were only a few competitors left. They finally landed on Boardwalk and bought the last remaining piece, House of Blues Concerts, which had clubs and amphitheaters that people preferred to play. With each purchase, they could squelch competition and confuse the investor about the company's lack of financial health by touting the added grosses as growth and actually heralding the mounting losses as investments. And now their next step to completely dominate the industry is to control the ticketing. They announced their own ticket system and spent millions to develop it. It lasted about 1 month. So what's their next move? Same as it ever was, buy the competition and ask everyone to trust them to serve the needs of the people. I suppose it could happen. I'm sure there was a dictator somewhere in history who honored that blind trust. I can't think of him now. So the question is, how much control is too much? When do they get told to stop? But why would they stop if they don't have to? You can't blame Live Nation at this point any more than you can blame a shark for eating people. As far as using another ticketing service, there are simply situations where it will not be possible to bring in a new ticketing system without a very steep, painful, expensive learning curve that no major act will be willing to endure. Live Nation themselves have admitted this, and that's why we're here today.
And the idea that the merger was in fact motivated because Live Nation couldn't compete in ticketing was backed up this week by Joe Berchtold, the CFO of Live Nation Ticketmaster.
Live Nation at the time was finding that it was very difficult to build its own ticketing system. That one of the driving motivations to the Ticketmaster merger was the feeling that it wasn't going to successfully build its own system, and it sought to find one that could more effectively serve its needs of selling tickets for fans. Yeah.
So a company, Live Nation, created by Clear Channel to squash concerns of antitrust violations, announced its intention to buy Ticketmaster, a huge ticketing company that had been the bane of artists' existences for a couple of decades. And so naturally, the government had concerns. And so from this week's hearing, here's Senator Mike Lee of Utah speaking to Kathleen Bradish. She's the vice president for legal advocacy at the American Antitrust Institute, and she used to be a high-ranking antitrust attorney at the Department of Justice.
Back in 2010, the Obama Justice Department, the Antitrust Division, concluded an investigation into the then proposed merger of Ticketmaster, the nation's largest and dominant ticketing provider, and Live Nation, the country's largest concert promoter. In a complaint alleging that the merger violated the Clayton Act, the department argued that it would eliminate recent but quickly growing head-to-head competition in the marketplace for ticketing services. The antitrust complaint filed by the Department of Justice against the proposed merger between Ticketmaster and Live Nation alleged, among other things, that Ticketmaster had at the time an 83% market share, with no single competitor having more than 4% of the market. It also alleged that Live Nation, for its part, was Ticketmaster's biggest customer and was the leading concert promoter at the time, of course. It also alleged that Live Nation had begun competing directly with Ticketmaster for ticketing services, rising over a very short period of time to 16% of the market share in just 2 months, kind of a meteoric rise.
Where you have a potential new entrant that's showing the ability to increase its market share rapidly and with great success, that's precisely the kind of pressure that you would want to have on a dominant player to make sure that they act in a competitive fashion.
However, instead of just stopping the merger, the Obama Justice Department in 2010 said that the department would approve it if and only if the parties agreed to a proposed consent decree. The consent decree that was entered into by Ticketmaster and Live Nation addressed two additional concerns. First, that the combination of the two companies would allow the merged firm to tie the provision of ticketing services and concert promotion. In other words, that Live Nation could force venues to use Ticketmaster in order to get concerts and vice versa. And second, that it might retaliate against venues that didn't comply with this arrangement. Now, Ticketmaster will tell you that the settlement agreement was something that they were willing readily to enter into. They weren't bothered by the consent decree at all, because this would, according to them, essentially be the functional equivalent of their offering the sleeves off of their vest. And that Ticketmaster and Live Nation readily agreed not to engage in behavior that the merged firm had no incentive and no intention of undertaking. And yet, here we are, almost 13 years later, faced with a flotilla of allegations and complaints that the merged entity has done exactly what it said would never happen.
So the Justice Department's consent decree that allowed the merger didn't allow Live Nation and Ticketmaster to do two things. One, force Ticketmaster to be used in Live Nation operated or controlled venues, and two, retaliate against anyone who doesn't want to use Ticketmaster. But back to this week's hearing.
My name is Clyde Lawrence, and this is Jordan Cohen. We are two of the 8 members of Lawrence, a soul pop band from New York City. As with promotion, if an artist plays at a Live Nation venue, the artist has no choice but to have the show ticketed by Ticketmaster.
My name is Jack Retzinger. I am the co-founder and CEO of SeatGeek. It is no mystery why no other company has significantly penetrated the primary ticketing market. Major venues in the U.S. know that if they move their primary ticketing business from Ticketmaster, they risk losing revenue they earn from Live Nation concerts. They know this because Live Nation has told them so, directly and indirectly, through its public pronouncements, private communications, and subsequent retaliation against venues that have signed deals with a competitor.
My name is Jerry Michelson, CEO and president of Jam Productions, a company that has produced and promoted events since 1972. When speaking with people that either own or manage venues, their biggest fear is if they leave Ticketmaster, they will lose content. So whether it's said or not, it's implied that if I don't use Ticketmaster, I am not going to get all the shows that I would like to have.
Get it.
And by the way, if you look at the difference between the Target Center in Minneapolis and the Xcel Energy Center in St. Paul, the Target Center is ticketed by Access. The Xcel Energy Center is ticketed by Ticketmaster. Look at the number of shows that play Xcel, and you'll see they far exceed the number of shows that play Target. And when you look at and break it down a little farther, you'll see that most of the shows that play Xcel are Live Nation shows, and they bring very few to the Access-controlled venue, the Target Center.
And here's Jack Gretzinger of SeatGeek.
We've seen Ticketmaster moving from 5 years, which used to be the standard length for a contract in our industry, to 10 in many cases. They're trying to lock things down so that if there is more pressure, they've at least signed a lot of these decade-long deals. So there's not a lot of time. If we want competition in this industry, it is already going to be very hard to change. Longer contracts make that even harder, and that is what they've been pushing for recently.
And on top of the problems that artists and competitors are having with Live Nation's practice of requiring artists and venues to use Ticketmaster, Live Nation's control over multiple parts of the live event supply chain are having financial consequences for the performers that we love. Here's band member Clyde Lawrence explaining how the ticket economics work for the performers. Senator Dick Durbin will also ask questions to Clyde Lawrence and Joe Berchtold, the president and CFO of Live Nation.
Most of the issues we face stem from the fact that Live Nation Ticketmaster often acts as three things at the same time: the promoter, the venue, and the ticketing company. Let's imagine we just played a sold-out show at a venue Live Nation owns and operates. When an artist plays these venues, they're required to use Live Nation as the promoter. Far from simply advertising, the promoter coordinates and pays the upfront costs to put together a concert, such as renting and staffing a venue and striking a deal with the performer. Since both our pay and theirs is a share of the show's profits, we should be true partners, aligned in our incentives. Keep costs low while ensuring the best fan experience. But with Live Nation not only acting as the promoter, but also as the owner and or operator of the venue, it seriously complicates these incentives. In a world where the promoter and the venue are not affiliated with each other, we can trust that the promoter will look to get the best deal from the venue. However, in this case, the promoter and the venue are part of the same corporate entity, so these line items are essentially Live Nation negotiating to pay itself. At the end of the show, costs will have eaten into most of the money made that evening, and due to Live Nation's control across the industry, we have practically no leverage in negotiating them. If they want to take 10% of the revenues and call it a facility fee, they can and have. If they want to charge $30,000 for the house nut, they can and have. And if they want to charge us $250 for a stack of 10 clean towels, they can and have. Once these costs, some of which went to Live Nation subsidiaries, are taken into account, the remainder is split between Live Nation and the band. We actually do set, the ticket prices, the base price. The artist does have a say in setting for sure, but those added Ticketmaster service fees, we have absolutely no say, and the venues claim that it's a Ticketmaster.
Mr. Berchtold, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. Yes, as Mr. Lawrence said, the band sets the ticket price. The service fee level is set by the venue.
And you control the venue. Do you not?
Of approximately 4,000 venues in the United States per Pollstar, Live Nation operates approximately 200, so roughly 5% of the venues in the country. Are they the biggest? No, sir. They're generally not the biggest. The biggest tend to be the sports venues, the arenas, the stadiums controlled by the sports teams or the owners of the sports teams.
Now I need to stop the testimony here for a moment because I feel like that testimony clouds the picture in a way that makes Live Nation Ticketmaster seem like they have far less control than they actually do. Because I found Live Nation's 2021 annual report to their investors. And inside of it, I found a handy-dandy chart that shows what kinds of venues Live Nation owns, leases, operates, or had exclusive booking rights for in 2021. In the United States, there are 226 venues that fall into that category, which is pretty close to what Berchtold told the committee. But when he said that they don't control many of the largest venues, that smells bullshitty to me. Because while Live Nation only operates one stadium, which has over 30,000 seats, it owns, leases, operates, or has exclusive rights to 68 amphitheaters, which have between 5,000 and 30,000 seats each. And they also either own, lease, operate, or have exclusive rights to 21 arenas, which have up to 20,000 seats each. And so here's the situation in that category that I would describe as large venues, as described by Jerry Michelson, the CEO and president of Jam Productions, one of Live Nation's much smaller competitors.
The arena-level concerts used to be Jam's most profitable segment of the business because that's where we earned our money. In 1996, Jam produced 100 concerts in arenas, but in 2011, 1 year after the merger, that decreased to 46 concerts. And in 2022, we only produced 14 arena concerts. Live Nation went after the arena business, and they succeeded in driving us and other independent promoters out of that sector. Live Nation effectively eliminated competition for indoor arena shows by utilizing the following methods: purchasing national indoor tours in arenas and for their outdoor amphitheaters, threatening financial penalties on a tour deal if the artist wanted to work for Jam, paying a band 100% or more of the gross ticket sales. And Live Nation managed artists typically only perform for Live Nation promoted shows at the arena level. Now Live Nation is going after music theaters and clubs of all sizes in an effort to control the entire live music industry from the top to the bottom. From 2010 to 2021, Live Nation added 61 theaters and 41 clubs to their already large arsenal of venues. The near complete domination of arenas because of the merger could soon happen in theaters and clubs in every community in the country.
And just because Live Nation doesn't own or operate a venue, because they don't own or operate many stadiums, that is true. But that doesn't mean that they aren't profiting from the events there or affecting the pricing because they own Ticketmaster. Here's Jack Gretzinger, the CEO of SeatGeek.
Today, Ticketmaster's estimated market share is over 70% of the U.S. primary ticketing market. Ticketmaster is the primary ticketing provider for more than 80% of the NBA, NHL, and NFL teams. Live Nation is also the largest promoter of major concerts in the world, promoting more than 73% of the top 25 tours in the U.S. in 2021.
So again, I have seat licenses in 2 sports stadiums, and Live Nation doesn't own, operate, or have exclusive rights to either of them. But we are required to use Ticketmaster to sell our season tickets. They don't have to own the stadium to remove our freedom of choice and to set and profit from fees. And so it's a bit weaselly for Joe Berchtold of Live Nation to make it seem like Live Nation only has a measly 5% market share and therefore influence in the ticketing market, especially in the middle of a conversation about pricing and fees. In fact, the entire conversation about pricing and fees was weaselly in this hearing. So let's go back to band member Clyde Lawrence, who will continue with his explanation of the ticket economics from the band's perspective. And in response to his testimony, you're also going to hear from Joe Berchtold, who's the president and CFO of Live Nation Ticketmaster.
The tickets were listed at $30, and our pay ended up shaking out to about $12 of each ticket. But in this hypothetical show, the fan did not pay $30 for that ticket. The fan paid $42 because Ticketmaster tacked on a 40% fee. And for the record, we've had them go as high as 82%. And to be clear, we have absolutely zero say or visibility in how much these fees will be. We find out the same way as everyone else by logging on to Ticketmaster once the show already goes on sale. And in case you're wondering, no, we, the artists, do not get a cent of that fee.
The fees are set by the venues. The Live Nation venues have fees that are consistent with the other venues in the marketplace and cover the cost of the operation of those venues.
Mr. Lawrence wants to reply.
We definitely ask venues before almost every show, what's the ticket fee going to be, both venues that Live Nation owns and ones that they just operate. And they always certainly don't take responsibility for the fees. So I don't know who is doing the fees, but we ask that question to the venues and they say, not only do we not choose what it is, we don't even know what it is. We can't even tell you what it's going to be. So I don't know where the answer lies, but no one's taking responsibility.
Last word, Ms.
And no one did take responsibility for the fees in that hearing. But in the Live Nation annual report to investors, someone certainly claimed to profit from those fees. Because Live Nation Ticketmaster told its investors, quote, "We also expect that revenue from primary ticketing sales, which consists primarily of our portion of per-ticket convenience charges and per-order service fees, will continue to comprise the substantial majority of our ticketing segment revenue," unquote. And so Live Nation Ticketmaster certainly profits from the convenience and service fees, even if they claim that they have no idea who sets them. But I've got to tell you, by the end of the hearing, I still didn't learn who sets those fees. And in fact, the entire ticketing economics is just impossible to understand. Because if this is the situation for the artists, us customers don't stand a chance. Here's Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina questioning band member Clyde Lawrence.
Is there any sort of back-end reporting to a performer saying this is how it all stacked up and this is how everybody in the mix actually benefited from it? I mean, do you have that sort of transparency today?
At the end of the day, we're given a settlement sheet, but that settlement sheet gives us the base price. So it would be that $30. But I would also add that I mentioned earlier about a thing called facility fees, where not only does the settlement sheet not show the extra $12 that might bring it to 42, it'll sometimes even say like 27, even though the base price was 30, because the venue's also just sort of arbitrarily taking an additional $3. So the sheet we get says the tickets were sold for 27 rather than 30 or even 42, which feels a little bizarre to me.
It's all so smarmy. And so to finish up the ticket economics, here's Clyde Lawrence explaining approximately what portion of our money goes to the artists when we buy a ticket to their shows and how that all works out for them.
So of the $42 a fan spent on a ticket, we receive $12. But whereas Live Nation's costs were already covered at this point in the calculation, we still need to pay for our touring costs. In our case, roughly 50% of our earnings is used to cover expenses. So that leaves us with $6 for an 8-piece band, pre-tax, and we also have to pay our own health insurance. To be fair, many of the issues we've addressed here are not exclusive to Live Nation Ticketmaster, and we've had a number of positive experiences with parts of Live Nation. Their venues are often filled with hardworking and passionate people, and most importantly, we love that all of their venues have one consistent Wi-Fi network and password. That one's a real game changer. Jokes aside, we truly do not see Live Nation as the enemy. They're just the largest player in a game that feels stacked against us as artists, and often our fans as well. Why is it that all of Live Nation's costs get recouped before the show hits its profit point, yet ours, the artists, don't? Why is there so little transparency as to what line items such as facility fees actually go towards? Why is it standard for Live Nation to take a 20% commission on our merchandise sales while we never receive a cent of their ancillary revenues like concessions, alcohol, and parking? Finally, why is Live Nation allowed to freely set exorbitantly high ticket fees without any transparency or input, while in other industries the government has mandated caps on various types of junk fees?
All very good questions. And as for why Live Nation and Ticketmaster hasn't had their fees capped by government despite Americans screaming about ticket fees for decades, I do think money could be a factor. Because since 2010, when the merger was approved, people affiliated with Live Nation Entertainment spent over $1.4 million on campaign contributions, mostly given to Democrats. And Live Nation has spent $5.4 million on lobbying, with a huge spike in the last 3 years. And as for how they get away with these fees and practices in the market, well, I think Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota summed it up pretty well.
Today, Live Nation doesn't just dominate the ticketing. It's about 70% of the big concert market, but also they own many of the major venues. And for the venues that they don't own, they tend to lock in on 3, 5, 7-year agreements, which means that the competitors that are out there aren't able to even compete when it comes to the ticketing. Finally, they dominate the promoting. So we have talked to many venues, some of which aren't willing to come forward, unlike one of them that is here today, but that say even if they're not out there threatening them, they're afraid to go to someone else because then they're not going to get the acts that they want. This is all a definition of monopoly because Live Nation is so powerful that it doesn't even need to exert pressure. It doesn't need to threaten because people just fall in line.
Which is exactly what Congress was warned would happen back in 2009 before this merger was allowed to go forward. Which begs the question, how was that merger allowed to go forward? Well, here's Senator Mike Lee of Utah questioning antitrust attorney and vice president for legal advocacy at the American Antitrust Institute, Kathleen Bradish.
Why, in your view, did the Department of Justice settle what seems to be a strong case that appears to involve the elimination of head-to-head competition with a monopolist? And would you agree that what we have here is not a shortcoming necessarily of our antitrust laws, but error, perhaps gross negligence in enforcing them?
Well, I think that there are two elements to why the DOJ would take a consent decree rather than pursue a case in court. Obviously, a case in court involves risk, so that it's hard, given the current state of the law, for DOJ to pursue a vertical merger case. So that will make them in many cases, hesitant to do that.
Right.
The second issue, I think, that comes up here is the need for witnesses in a court case. And in a situation where there's a pervasive fear of the dominant firm, where venues and promoters and other independent rivals will potentially suffer consequences, and history since then has suggested that's the case, they would have to testify in court. And to get someone to take that risk is not an easy ask.
And so the Department of Justice allowed the merger to happen, but entered into that consent decree, entered into an agreement with Live Nation telling them they can't force venues to use Ticketmaster and can't retaliate against venues that don't. Obviously, they violated that. And so here's what's happened since then. Here's Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, and he's also going to speak to Kathleen Bradish, again, of the American Antitrust Institute, and she's also going to be asked questions by Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri.
Unfortunately, that consent decree does not appear to have been effective. In the decade plus since the merger, Live Nation has consolidated its dominant position in the ticketing and live entertainment markets, and the result is a competition-killing strategy that has left artists and fans paying the price.
We should learn from the failure of the conduct remedies that were a condition of the DOJ's clearance of the 2010 merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster. A lengthy DOJ investigation concluded in 2020 that Live Nation Ticketmaster repeatedly violated the requirements of the consent decree. Unfortunately, rather than seeking an effective structural remedy, DOJ simply amended some of the language in the consent decree and extended the decree for another 5.5 years.
It's not normal, is it, for antitrust consent decrees to get extended like this after violations are identified? Am I correct?
That's correct.
So what do you think is going on here?
Well, I think it certainly shows that the problem that they anticipated in 2010 has come to pass in 2020. It means that Ticketmaster Live Nation is a monopolist whose conduct needs to be supervised. I don't think that this changes their incentives, so it makes it very difficult in the long run for DOJ to actually supervise it.
You don't think it changes Live Nation's incentives?
Right.
Saying.
I mean, their incentives are still to bully.
Right.
And so this Congress is getting involved, starting with this Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. Here's Senator Mike Lee of Utah.
There are news reports that the Justice Department has opened a new investigation into Ticketmaster's conduct, but Congress has an important role to play here as well. While DOJ undoubtedly wants to know whether Ticketmaster is violating the consent decree, Congress should be asking whether the consent decree was the right decision in the first place. Was the divestiture sufficient to ensure competitive pressure on the combined entity of Ticketmaster and Live Nation? Were the behavioral remedies capable of preventing that very kind of abuse? If the allegations that we're likely to hear today are true, if they can be proven, that they raise very serious doubts about the sufficiency of the DOJ's efforts and arguably counsel in favor of a new approach going forward.
And so this hearing largely focused on what could be done going forward. But the first thing Congress has to do when considering antitrust, which is anti-monopoly legislation, they have to determine if we are in fact dealing with a monopoly situation here. And so here's Senator Ted Cruz of Texas speaking first to Jack Gretzinger of SeatGeek, then to Jerry Michelson, the CEO of Jam Productions, who is struggling to compete with Live Nation. Then he'll talk to a guy that we haven't heard from yet today, Sal Nuzzo, who is the senior vice president of the James Madison Institute, which is a nonprofit that focuses on analyzing economic policy issues that face the state of Florida, which is home to 13 major sports teams. Then we'll hear from Kathleen Bradish again. She's the Antitrust Institute lady. And then we'll hear from the cool band guy, Clyde Lawrence. And then the final witness that Senator Cruz will talk to is Joe Berchtold of Live Nation Ticketmaster.
I want to start with a question for the witnesses. And Mr. Gretzinger, I'm going to start with you and just ask, in your judgment, is Ticketmaster a monopoly?
Unequivocally. Live Nation controls the most popular entertainers in the world, routes most of the large tours, operates the ticketing systems, and even owns many of the venues. This power over the entire live entertainment industry allows Live Nation to maintain its monopolistic influence over the primary ticketing market.
Mr. Mickelson?
Yes, sir, without a doubt.
Mr. Nuzzo?
Yes, absolutely.
Ms. Bradish?
It's certainly acting like a monopoly.
Mr. Lawrence?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So, Mr. Berchtold, do you agree with the other witnesses on this panel?
We absolutely believe the ticketing business has never been more competitive. We hear people say that the ticketing markets are less competitive today than they were at the time of the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger. That's simply not true. In 2009, the Department of Justice alleged the Ticketmaster's market share was over 80%. It's a different story today. The most obvious change is the emergence of the enormous secondary ticketing market, in which Ticketmaster has a modest market share and many strong competitors. But also in primary ticketing, the Ticketmaster of 2010 did not face the level of competition that we face today with new competitors highly capitalized, including SeatGeek, AEG's Access, and Eventbrite, along with established competitors including Tickets.com and Paciolan. Ticketmaster has lost, not gained, market share since the merger. And as I mentioned, today's competitive bidding process with numerous credible alternative ticketing companies resulting in getting less of the economic value in a ticketing contract every year.
So are they just making it up? Why does everyone else perceive you as a monopoly? Where's that coming from?
I can't speak to all of their motivations on their points of view, but I think that if you simply look at what is the market power exercised by venues, which is perhaps not fully understood in our business.
How about on the ticketing side? What percent of the market do y'all have?
I would estimate, depending on how you want to count what's in the market, between 50 and 60%. 50
and 60, and depending on how you count it, does anyone have a markedly different measure of that?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
Senator. They have 87% of the ticketing contracts at the NBA and the NHL arenas. They have 93% of the ticketing contracts at the NFL stadiums. Those are the most important venues.
And so Congress is going to have to decide if that market share, 50 to 60% of ticketing controlled by one company in the United States, plus all of the control that that company has over venues that they own and operate, and the control they have over bands that they have exclusive contracts with, and all of the events that they promote. You know, Congress is going to have to use this information to decide if Live Nation Ticketmaster is exploiting monopoly powers, and if so, what to do about it. But Live Nation Ticketmaster itself, as you heard, well, they see no monopoly here. Instead, this is what their CFO says is the real problem in live event ticketing.
There are problems in the ticketing industry, problems we believe can and should be addressed through legislation. Many are the direct result of industrial-scale ticket scalping that goes on today. A $5 billion industry in concerts alone in the United States, fueled by practices that run counter to the interests of artists and their fans.
Industrial scale ticket scalping is the problem. But let's just ignore the fact that Ticketmaster built tools to help those industrial scale ticket scalpers make money off of their dirty deeds. Tools that give Live Nation Ticketmaster a cut. And I am very disappointed to tell you that despite the investigation that exposed Trade Desk's existence having been released to the public years ago, Trade Desk was not a focus of this hearing. And this is one of those times where I watch these hearings and I have daydreams of being able to have my 5 minutes of questions, because I would have focused every second of them on asking the Live Nation Ticketmaster CFO about this clear conflict of interest. Mr. Berchtold, you have testified today that you think industrial scale scalpers are the problem. And so why in the fighty fuck, sir, is your company helping them sell their tickets and taking a cut of the profits? Wouldn't you love to hear him have to answer that question? Wouldn't you also love to hear someone say fighty fuck in Congress? But no senators ask that question, and I find that annoying. And so, without having that glaring conflict of interest exposed, the Live Nation Ticketmaster CFO offered these solutions to the long list of problems discussed in the hearing.
There are many things we can and should accomplish together. We should enlarge the scope of the BOTS Act and increase enforcement. We should enact categorical prohibitions on fraudulent ticket practices, including deceptive URLs and offering for sale tickets before they're on sale in the primary. We should mandate all-in pricing so that fans see the full cost of their tickets from the start.
as if Ticketmaster has no ability on its own to display all taxes and fees in their front page pricing. But notice how none of his solutions limit Ticketmaster from making money off of reselling the tickets that the bots gobble up. You know, they say they want to punish the bots for existing. But as long as Trade Desk exists, and as long as Ticketmaster is making money in the resale market, they are business partners with the bots. They are business partners with the professional scalpers. And so those solutions ring hollow to me. And I wasn't alone. Here's Kathleen Bradish of the American Antitrust Institute.
Well, none of those suggestions go to the core of what we've been talking about today, which is the antitrust problem. The fact that Live Nation Ticketmaster, because of its market power, has the incentive to do things to exclude competition in all of its markets up and down the supply chain for live entertainment.
And so when it comes to Live Nation Ticketmaster specifically, here's what she thinks needs to be done. Here's Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri asking her the question.
What should happen then, in your view?
A structural remedy. There should be a spinoff. There should be disintegration of the vertical integration.
Very good.
Which was a sentiment echoed by the SeatGeek guy.
The only way to restore competition in this industry is to break up Ticketmaster and Live Nation.
But of course he thinks his largest competitor should be broken up. But as Clyde Lawrence said, this problem is bigger than Live Nation and Ticketmaster. The industry itself has practices that are unfair to artists and to consumers. And so from the artist's end, this is what Clyde Lawrence would like to see happen.
I think that we have a few specific things that we would just love to see changed in the industry, however we're able to get there. To list a few, I think that dealing with this whole inconsistency around ancillary revenues, which is something that we're not talking about as much today, the idea that Live Nation or frankly most promoters typically take 20% or more of our gross merchandise sales from the night, under the idea that they're providing the real estate, but we're providing all the customers. As Mr. Nuzzo was talking about, you say you're going to see a Harry Styles show, you're not going to XYZ Arena. So how come we don't get any of their bar sales? That's one example. I could keep listing more. Expansion of off-platform ticketing or ticketing choice, caps on fees, like we're talking about. Greater transparency on the settlement sheets that we receive at the end of the night. That's a whole other conversation, but I could list 10 things about the way those are formatted and broken out in a way that feels not totally ideal or fair to artists. I could go on and on.
Which seem reasonable to me. Now, I'm not sure Congress can mandate a lot of those, or if they should, but those are changes that Live Nation could make voluntarily right now, and it does seem like they would cool down some of the heat that Live Nation is currently experiencing. But if Live Nation continues to choose not to do those things, it would be yet another sign that Live Nation is so powerful that they don't have to give a fuck. And so we'll just see if anything comes from those suggestions. But this was a congressional hearing, and it's in Congress where the ideas presented by Kathleen Bradish of the Antitrust Institute could come into play. And so here she is speaking to Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii. And just so you know, in this exchange, you're going to hear the word presumption thrown around. And in this case, they're speaking about legal presumption. And in the case of mergers, a presumption basically says that mergers in highly concentrated markets are so likely to be anti-competitive that they can be presumed to be anti-competitive unless proven otherwise. And so when there is presumption, the companies have to prove that their merger will not harm competition before it can be approved. With presumption, the burden is on the company. But when there is not a presumption, the agency in charge of the approvals has to bear the burden of proving the merger will be anti-competitive. It essentially requires the government to predict the future, which is hard, if not impossible, to do. And so with that in mind, here's Kathleen Bradish of the Antitrust Institute, who will be asked questions by Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii.
AI urges enforcers and lawmakers to consider three major features of a multi-pronged approach to the Live Nation Ticketmaster monopoly problem. First, consider standards that enable the agencies to challenge vertical mergers as effectively as horizontal mergers. The incipiency standard in Section 7 of the Clayton Act is designed to prevent all mergers that may enhance market power and lead to anti-competitive effects. We currently have a structural presumption for horizontal mergers. We badly need a presumption for vertical mergers. either through legislative action or new antitrust guidelines that get adopted by the courts. Second, support more vigorous antitrust enforcement with legislation designed to strengthen and clarify the U.S. antitrust laws. Senator Klobuchar's proposed Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act is a leading example. The bill would, among other things, update legal standards for mergers and strengthen the standard for prohibiting exclusionary conduct by dominant firms. Such reforms would reduce the formidable burdens on the government for bringing monopolization and merger cases. Finally, consider the merits of an oversight regime to facilitate access to and transparency in ticketing. Dominant digital platforms can engage in practices designed to self-preference, such as steering music fans to Ticketmaster's proprietary ticketing services. Solutions to these problems may well require establishing rules of the road or codes of conduct for digital ticketing platforms. Such legislation has been proposed at both the state and federal level.
You testified, Ms. Badish, that there should be a presumption for vertical mergers as we do for horizontal mergers. What would that presumption be for vertical mergers?
Well, for vertical mergers, we can obviously look at the share in a particular market. We can look at the ability of the monopolist to exercise power in another market, downstream or upstream. There are a number of ways to get at the same problem, but the idea is that you give the DOJ or FTC a foothold in order to be able to bring the case before a court, a foothold to be able to say this is illegal.
Do we need to amend the Sherman Act to create such a presumption for vertical mergers, or do we need to strengthen the Clayton Act, Section 7?
Well, I think that the current Clayton Act and Sherman Act don't have the presumptions for horizontal mergers. Those come from the case law. So we don't necessarily need to change the fundamental contours of the Clayton Act and the Sherman Act. In fact, I would suggest that the Clayton Act already builds this in.
Which I find kind of fascinating. Essentially, if I'm understanding what she's saying correctly, she seems to be saying that current law gives all the authority needed to police and stop vertical mergers like Live Nation and Ticketmaster. And having read Section 7 of the Clayton Act myself, I'm inclined to agree with her. Which makes me wonder, how is it that presumption exists for horizontal mergers, but not really for vertical mergers? Is the Justice Department just not using its authority? And what do we do when the Justice Department refuses to do its job using the power that Congress has given it? And so I'm glad that Congress is getting involved here, because even if the law doesn't need to be changed, it might need to be clarified. And Congress does have oversight over the other branches of government, over the judicial branch and the executive branch, the law enforcement branch. And so I would like to see Congress bring in officials from at least the Justice Department and grill them on why they extended that consent decree, knowing that it had been broken, instead of forcing a breakup of the company that had clearly violated the terms of the first consent decree. You know, maybe people at the Justice Department, maybe they see current law differently and don't think that they can break up these companies. Maybe they don't think they can stop these mergers. I don't know. But I think this would be an excellent area of follow-up for the Senate Judiciary Committee. But aside from those ideas for improvement offered by witnesses, there is one more idea that was kicked around extensively in this hearing, an idea presented not by witnesses, but by a senator. And it's an idea that, if followed through with, would certainly affect me as a season ticket holder who is required to buy tickets to games that I know that I can't always attend. And it would affect you if you are existing in the age of digital ticketing, if you buy tickets to events as a group, and if you sometimes show up to events at different times than your friends. And so here's the debate on the idea that will be presented by Senator John Kennedy, who, by the way, speaks slower than molasses flowing up a country hill. And so please know that editing out his pauses is one of the ways that I provide value to you in putting together these hearing-based episodes, because this was the most tedious segment to edit. But anyway, here's our generation's John Kennedy, not of Camelot, but of Louisiana.
What if we adopt a rule that said tickets to a Taylor Swift concert or Mr. Lawrence's band's concert are non-transferable? Now, you're not going to have a problem with bots. If you got a scalper trying to buy 2,000 tickets. They don't want 2,000 tickets. They want a profit. And it'll hold down ticket prices. Why don't we do that?
Here's Clyde Lawrence, the musician.
I think whether it was that or only transferable at face value, I'm not an expert on the secondary ticketing market, so all I can tell you is that from the artist perspective, we would not make $1 less if that were
Ms. Lawrence, if you care about the consumer, and I hear you say that you do, I'll tell you what the consumer is concerned about. The consumer is not concerned about how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin and whether this is a antitrust violation or not, or the FTC. The consumer is concerned about the price.
Yeah, so I'm saying I think.
So would you support non-transferability, or you can only transfer it at face value?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I'm not an expert
you, Ms.
on
Bradish?
Here's Kathleen Bradish, the Antitrust Institute lady.
Well, I think non-transferability is making a judgment in lieu of what a customer would make.
I understand what it means. Would you support that?
No.
Okay. How about you, Mr. Newso?
Here's Sal Newso, the guy who studies economic issues affecting the sports-loving state of Florida.
I would respectfully not support such a rule.
Okay. How about you, Mr. Mickelson?
Michelson, but that's good.
Here's Jerry Michelson, the independent promoter.
Yes, Senator. Good question. Totally support non-transferability.
Okay. Thank you.
Totally.
Next, sir.
Here's Jack Grutzinger of SeatGeek.
We respectfully think transferability is important for consumers.
You think it's important? Is it important for consumers or for the middlemen?
Like, let's say I'm going to a show with Jerry and I buy the tickets. I want to be able to send that ticket to Jerry so that we can go together.
That's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah, it's certainly, I think there's interesting ways we could use.
A few people may have to eat the ticket. They get sick. They can't go. But most people will think about that before they buy the ticket. Now, if you want to hold down prices, cut out the middlemen and the middlewomen. You want to cut out bots, make it non-transferable or transferable only at price, at face value. Couldn't a major artist, couldn't a Bruce Springsteen say, whose music I love, couldn't he say, look, I've got market power. I'm going to set this price for the ticket. I'm going to set this price for the service fee, and it's going to be non-transferable. Couldn't an artist do that with market power?
For sure. Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. And
Problem solved.
Some artists have done that.
Problem solved.
For sure.
How about that, Mr. Burkholt?
And here's Joe Berchtold of Live Nation Ticketmaster.
Yes, Senator, we would fully support an artist's right to make their shows non-transferable.
Do you support non-transferability or not?
We would support non-transferability, yes.
Senator Mazie Hirano of Hawaii later in the hearing followed up on that debate.
I think that Mr. Nuzzo and Ms. Bradish, you just responded that you would not support non-transferability. Very briefly, could you explain why not?
Well, I think it goes to a regulatory solution to something that should be a competition issue. If there were competition, if we solve the competition issue here, then customers will get what they want. So I think it doesn't get to the heart of the matter, essentially.
Mr. Newsom?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator. It's a good question, and ultimately we would look at it in a couple of ways. One is a property rights issue. As an individual purchasing a ticket, I should have the ability to transfer that ticket at a market rate. Secondly, I would point to a statistic, I believe it was from a GAO report, that close to, if not a majority of the tickets on the resale market are going for under the market value. So while I would, contend that, I'm not going to pay $500, let alone $5,000 to go see Taylor Swift, the secondary market allows, kind of artists like the band Lawrence who are selling to smaller venues and are growing the ability to fill those venues, especially when those cases come where an individual is unable to use their ticket.
So isn't Ticketmaster also in the secondary market?
I believe the largest secondary market is StubHub, but I do believe Ticketmaster is either building or growing a secondary.
So I'm surprised that Mr. Berchtold says that he would definitely support non-transferability. Nothing is simple.
And so Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri followed up on that thought with questions for Joe Berchtold of Live Nation Ticketmaster.
I heard your exchange with Senator Kennedy. I don't understand why it's a good thing for the ticket buyer to not be able to resell her tickets or his tickets.
Senator, I think that tickets in concerts in particular are a unique animal in that those tickets are often underpriced by the artists because they want to deliver value to the fans. And that creates the opportunity, a $5 billion a year opportunity in the United States for the industrial scalping of tickets using bots to unfairly gain possession of those tickets, illegally gain possession of those tickets, and resell them on the secondary. So the transferability comes into play as part of the discussion, or this comes into the discussion on transferability, given that illegal activity that is enabled by ease of transfer.
But are there other examples of markets, ticket markets, where we limit transferability in that way?
Senator, I'm not aware of other markets where you have such a substantial arbitrage in the value.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you can't do it obviously with movie tickets. Let's say. I mean, those are freely transferable. I just worry about the effect on consumers and prices. If you tell a consumer who buys her ticket that she can't then turn around and sell it, I mean, you talk about a market intervention. That's a pretty significant one. I understand why the artists would like it. I certainly understand why you would like it. It's not clear to me why it's good for consumers.
Yes, Senator, I think we believe it's good for consumers because it would mean that the consumers could buy all of those tickets rather than having what is often 20 to 30% of concert tickets purchased by scalpers using bots and put on the secondary market directly.
Now, when I heard that answer from Live Nation Ticketmaster, it scrambled my brain a little bit because we know they're helping the professional scalpers. They're helping the bots, essentially, to organize their inventory and easily and efficiently sell their thousands of tickets. And Live Nation Ticketmaster is making money in the process. But it didn't take long for me to see that Live Nation Ticketmaster is, of course, perfectly happy to abandon the scalper assistance and resale part of their business in exchange for destroying the entire resale market, the only place where they have real competition in ticketing. Because non-transferability would mean that, the Raiders and the Chargers would sell me tickets to all their games, which I'm contractually obligated to buy from Ticketmaster, and then that's it. Ticketmaster collects the fees on that primary ticketing, which those fees, they could jack them up as high as they like since I would have no choice but to buy from them. And then the ticket I bought can never be sold again. Not for a higher or lower price on SeatGeek or StubHub or any other reseller. Mainly because without being able to do their core business, the reselling sites probably couldn't exist anymore. And so prohibiting resales would literally destroy the competing ticketing businesses. And so if Ticketmaster, with a self-reported 50 to 60% market share in ticketing now, isn't a monopoly, just wait until all those companies that let us buy tickets from not Ticketmaster cease to exist. What will their market share look like when it's game over for all of the other players? I don't think that this solves any problems because monopoly's gonna monopoly. And so Live Nation Ticketmaster telling Congress to make our ability to resell our tickets illegal, which would kill the reselling companies and make them even more dominant in ticketing, that position makes sense if you want this monopoly to get even more monopoly-like. Now, it doesn't make sense if you want to solve the monopoly problem. But if Congress buys that this is just all about those bots, all trouble. If Congress buys that bullshit, well, I think the resale market should be concerned. Because Live Nation Ticketmaster, they were the one entity represented at that witness table with millions of dollars being passed from people in it to congressional campaigns. And Live Nation Ticketmaster was the one entity represented at that witness table which spends millions on lobbying on Capitol Hill. They are certainly the most influential voice at that witness table because they are purchasing that influence. And so, even though it might seem dumb on its face, I think the idea of removing our freedom to sell our tickets is one that we need to take seriously. No matter what the free marketeers say about loving and protecting competition in the marketplace, I don't think they are people that we can trust. Because it seems to me, after a decade of analyzing the actions of members of both the Republican and Democratic parties, They seem to love and protect corporate campaign contributions more, and Live Nation has plenty flowing their way. And so if you have thoughts about this idea or anything else that you heard today, now is the time to contact specifically your senators, because they're the ones that are looking into this issue. And if there is going to be a bill about this that moves in the 118th Congress, I do think it's likely that the Senate Judiciary Committee is where that bill will be born. And because of that, your voice is a lot louder if your senator is one that sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And it's a pretty big committee. There are 22 members on the Senate Judiciary Committee, 22 out of 100, representing 18 states, including the two largest states in our union, California and Texas. In fact, both of California's senators are on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And so Californians can make a big difference on this if you take a few minutes to share your thoughts, suggestions, or concerns. But in general, this issue is bigger than tickets. In industry after industry, we are seeing that we increasingly have the illusion of choice as big companies continue to be allowed to gobble up smaller ones, and companies within the same supply chain. Some industries don't even bother with the illusion. Like take pharmacies. Between CVS, Walgreens, and Rite Aid, they make up over 95% of the market. We just know that we don't have a lot of choices there. But then there's like car rentals. There's the same number of companies, but it looks like there's more. Because when you walk up to the car rental facilities, it looks like you have a dozen companies to choose from. But you don't. You have 3. National and Alamo, they are Enterprise. Budget, Payless, and Zipcar, they are Avis. And Dollar, Thrifty, and Firefly, they are Hertz. And then it gets even more ridiculous in other industries like grocery stores. Lucky, Pavilions, Randall, Safeway, Shaw's, Star Market, Tom Thumb, United Supermarkets, Vaughn's, all of those and more are Albertsons. Ralph's, Dillon's, Smith's, King Soopers, Fry's, QFC, City Market, Owens, Payless, Baker's, JC, Harris Teeter, Pick and Save, Food for Less. All of those and more are Kroger. And those two giant supermarket companies, Albertsons and Kroger, they're in the process of merging right now. In 2009, despite obvious signs that a merger between Live Nation and Ticketmaster being a vertical merger with all kinds of monopoly potential, despite those warning signs and Congress being told point blank that exactly what we're seeing right now would come to pass, that merger was allowed. But in 2023, the wisdom of those types of mergers is being challenged. The Albertsons-Kroger merger is being fought in the press in real time. So just 3 days ago, the New York Times ran yet another article about that merger, pointing out and detailing the plan that's being executed by the private equity vultures that own Albertsons. A plan which is to drain Albertsons of all $4 billion of its cash, draining that cash right into investor pockets, and then have Albertsons cry poverty, saying that they have to be allowed to merge with Kroger or else all those brands that Albertsons has gobbled up will die. Please, DOJ, we're too big to fail. What about all those peasants who will be out of their slave wage jobs? Just wait for it. It's coming. 15 years ago, we would hear about that plot after the merger sailed through. But this time, it's being watched and reported on in real time. And both the FTC and Justice Department are looking hard at denying that merger because we are paying closer attention to these antitrust things. And so something feels different now, even from just a few years ago. Like the tide is finally turning against big business. And I think that the Kroger-Albertsons merger will really tell us if that's true or not. Because if that merger goes through, then we will know for sure that the Justice Department has simply decided not to enforce antitrust laws. That one is just so obviously a competition killer. But I'm actually hopeful in this realm of policy because the Live Nation Ticketmaster hearing happened, and some of the people on the committee that held the hearing were on the committee in 2009. This is one of the reasons why I'm against term limits, because sometimes it's a good thing to have people in Congress for a long time, long enough to have their previous decisions proven wrong, long enough to learn from their mistakes and fix them. And this is one area where both parties seem to be working together on their concerns, at least in the Senate, specifically the Senate Judiciary Committee. That hearing had no partisan bickering. The senators you heard from today asking relevant questions and follow-ups were from both parties. The hearing was refreshingly free of nonsense, which means that in a Congress that is all but guaranteed, due to the circus over in the House, to be full of nonsense, combating monopolies in our country is one area that might not just stall out for the next 2 years. And that's good. And so again, if you have thoughts on this, share them with your senators, because this effort is worth your time. Thanks for listening. So the last episode of Congressional Dish has been very well received. I'm really pleased with the reaction and the feedback. Although there is one thing about it that I'm really feeling bad about. I know why I did it, but it's being taken by some the wrong way. But I kept calling the people that participated in the riot dumb. And some people are interpreting that as if I'm calling all Trump supporters dumb. And so I just want to let people know, if you've stuck with this podcast after hearing me say that, that is not at all what I was saying. I'm talking about the 800 people who went into the building. After watching all those hours of the January 6th committee hearings and doing all the research, and actually you heard this in previous episodes about January 6th, I was very frustrated with the members of Congress specifically who have been calling the 800 rioters that went into the building terrorists and domestic terrorists. I do not think that is the proper label for these people. I think they were deceived. I think they were gullible. And yes, I think they were dumb. I was calling them dumb out of empathy, really, as a way to be like, these were not masterminds of terror. Like, I don't think that is what we were seeing here. But I, in no way, am saying that all Trump supporters are dumb people or that all Republicans are dumb people or anything like that. I think that's absurd. And so I just wanted to make that really crystal clear. Yeah, doing these episodes is hard sometimes. And I think because of that, that might explain some of the reviews that I've seen come into the podcast. We are getting hit by clearly partisans who don't like that I produced that episode. And so I'm going to ask for your help here, because I spent more money than I care to fathom purchasing some ads on some other podcasts, because I would like for this show to grow. But when people go to specifically Apple Podcasts right now, the first few reviews, there's quite a few 1-star reviews calling me a liar and saying that I'm biased. And, I don't take these reviews seriously, but they do make the show look bad. And so if you haven't reviewed the show on Apple Podcast yet, if you could go and give the show 5 stars and put in a review, I do think it might help some new listeners to actually give the show a try, because right now there is a partisan attack from people who didn't like the January 6th episode. But I am really thrilled to tell you that the overwhelming response to that episode has been positive. I do think that people listened to the whole thing. And that here on Congressional Dish, we're a listener-supported podcast. We've gotten quite a bit of support for that episode. And I am so excited to tell you that we have, right off the bat, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 executive producers on the January 6th committee episode. I am so excited about that. It instantly became the #1 most valuable episode of Congressional Dish. We are working on a part on the website where you can see the order of the episodes based on the number of executive producers. And if you don't know what I'm talking about here, for $535, you can become an executive producer, which is a real credit. You can put it on your LinkedIn. You will have helped pay for a significant portion of a episode's production costs. And so when you do that, you get to put your name on the episode as an executive producer, and it lends your credibility to that episode. You're basically vouching for that episode and telling anyone who's new to the show, like, this is one that I think is worth your time. And so we're building something on the website right now that will update with every new episode to show what the most valuable episodes of Congressional Dish are. But with these 4 executive producer credits, the January 6th episode is now firmly in the number 1 position, and the National Endowment for Democracy episode is now number 2. But I would love to thank right now our 4 executive producers for the January 6th episode. So first up, I would like to thank Shelly Streisner. And I'm sorry if I, after all these years, will I ever get your last name correct? But Shelly is an executive producer on our Contriving January 6th episode, and she sent in a message that says, "Hi, Jen and Lauren. By the way, if you're new, Lauren is my sister, and she does all my accounting and interacts with all of our producers all the time." So she said, "Hi, Jen and Lauren. I would like to be a sponsor of the January 6th coup attempt episode. Excellent work as usual, Jen. This episode was an important summary of the full story, expertly assembled and in a shareable length, unlike the hearings themselves, as you noted. I commend your continued nonpartisan honesty in your analysis and your openness in how the content of the hearings changed your perspective on the events leading up to and on January 6th. Yeah, dude, I had to eat some crow on that one, didn't I? Because I said that committee and the investigation was unnecessary, and whoo, boy, was I wrong. Yeah, so had to eat that mistake. But back to Shelly's note, she said, "Thank you again for your dedication to this. We really do care." Well, and thank you so much for putting your money where those words are. It's very much appreciated. Also appreciated is Michael Constantino, who is now an executive producer on Contriving January 6th. And he said, "Hello. While listening to Congressional 266, I figured I should add up what I have sent in to see if I have another executive producer credit. And I do. Currently, I'm an executive producer on Congressional 232, the American Rescue Plan, and 233, Long COVID. For my next one, because I was listening to it when I found this out, and it is an amazing episode, I'd like to be an executive producer on 266, Contriving January 6th. So much info that I did not know and was laid out in an easy way to follow. As always, love the podcast. You do such great work. And P.S., I really like Talking Fat and hope that someday you and Jonathan can start that up again." Yeah, to those that were fans of Talking Fat will have one more episode. When we get around to scheduling it, Jonathan and I are going to record a goodbye episode. And the reason is that Jonathan is doing really well and he is trying out some different things, but he is holding steady on his weight and he's just prioritizing other things. And for me, I'm actually not focusing on my weight as much. I'm focusing on other parts of my health. And because of that, my weight is becoming less of an issue. Like, I'm getting more into sports and sleep. So it's kind of outlived its usefulness for us at the moment. But yeah, we really appreciate everyone that listened and supported us. And I am sorry for people that were leaning on that podcast. I know that some people felt like you were on the journey with us for those 2 years that we did the podcast. And I hate to let you down, but yeah, we can't do it anymore. It's just not working for us. So thanks for listening. And yeah, you can always find Jonathan over on Trivial Warfare, and you can find me here. So, but yeah, thanks, Michael. I also want to thank Daniel Slaughter, who sent in a message along with his executive producer credit, who said, "Hello, Jennifer. I've been quietly donating $10 a month since June of 2015. That is amazing. Which brings me to roughly $910. I'm not one for fanfare, so I haven't asked for an EP on any of the episodes. That said, I can't look away from this one. Real quick on that, I don't think that claiming an executive producer credit is necessarily like seeking fanfare. Especially once we have the chart up on congressionaldish.com, like, you really are lending your vouch onto an episode because there's so many episodes in the back catalog. And I get asked so often, like, you have, these 260 something episodes, which ones should I listen to? My response is all of them. Or, I don't know which the best ones are. So I just feel like having you guys who are investing in this show lend your vouch to your favorite episodes. I think that's so much more useful for new people. So, it's serving a purpose. You're actually helping the show by claiming those executive producer credits. It's not like a look at me thing. they're helpful to the podcast. It's helpful to the podcast to show people that we have this many people willing to put their names on it. So thank you for stepping up and doing so. And like, obviously, thank you for supporting the show for 8 years almost. That's so cool. Yeah, I don't think you're necessarily seeking fanfare with the executive producer credits. Like, you really are helping out the show. But back to his note, he said, I thought the January 6th hearings were merely political theater and paid little attention. Episode 266 really opened my eyes. Thank you. I pay with paper check and an extra $100 is on its way. Ooh, thank you. I would be honored to be the executive producer of this episode. I completely understand your position on continuing the show. I'm 50 years old and I'm not sure that we can actually affect anything. I used to think we could, but I'm not sure anymore. However, knowing and understanding what is happening is invaluable, and that is what you bring. I continue to vote my conscience, but there are too many people that have picked a side and aren't interested in hearing anything that challenges their opinions. Oh, yeah. And those Apple reviews are proven not to be true, my friend. Back to his note, he says, I appreciate what you do and will be here as long as you are. All the best, Dan. And my husband and my in-laws are walking in the door. I'm almost done. Hold on one second. Okay, and the last person I need to thank here is Christine Brendel, who is a longtime listener and first-time payer and an executive producer, which is so cool. But Christine said your episode about January 6th was so comprehensive and so ignored by the media that we had to jump in with a donation. I think we're landing on the correct number for producing. Thanks. Well, thank you so much for producing this episode. It's awesome to have this many names on an episode within one episode of its release. That is just so exciting and makes me feel like I worked through the holidays for good reason. So, all right, like I said, I got people here and I want to hang out with them. So I hope you all are doing well, and I will be back in a couple weeks with some information from the defense authorization. Until then, take care. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. What the facts? And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, in the end he'll justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.